So this is probably going to suit the planners a little more than the people who write without a plan, but it may be useful to you as well because there is at some point a little bit of planning probably going to go on, even if you write without a plan altogether. But for those who plan, I write not necessarily in chronological order at all. In fact, more often out of chronological order than in chronological order. The reason being, what I really want to be driven by as much as possible is inspiration, because I think that the writing that comes spontaneously and is inspired is usually the best writing that I come up with. Not always, but usually it is. I'll explain how I know this in a minute. So the objective is to have as much inspired writing as possible. So the way I achieve this is to write the skeletal plan for my story. Not super robust. It's sort of like, it might have 15 different basic plot points, and then at the start of my writing day, just look through the skeletal plan and wait for a scene or an idea to appear in my head, and then start filling in that little part of the skeleton. And often that's not up the front of the story, it's somewhere in the middle. I suddenly get a scene or in the final act of the story, and I write it. And then I start again. I go back to the start of the plan, or I go to the end of the plan, or I go to the middle of the plan, and I just look for inspiration, look for something to come to me that I can then write down. So it's trying to get as much inspired writing into the process as possible. I don't know many people who do this or if any other writers do, but it's something that works for me. The reason I feel that it's how I get my best writing is because it's quite routine for me to get an idea of the ending scene before I've got that deep into the story itself. I don't know why this happens, but it just does. So I'll often write that scene in my skeletal plan. I'll write that scene that came as an inspired moment into the plan. So that'll be there captured in the last part of the skeleton. And then I'll be writing, and I'll eventually get to that scene, and I'll write the scene. I let myself write the scene in chronological order as well. And so often I've compared the chronological version, where I got there mechanically, and the inspired version, where I really didn't know what I was doing. It just came to me. And almost every single time, the inspired version has some gold in it that I then weave into the chronological version. So, and sometimes it's just a whole lot better than the mechanical version. So that's how I know, or I've come to conclude, for me at least, that the inspired stuff is the really, really good stuff. And that's why I aim to get as much of that into the story as I possibly can. So I'm less inclined to write chronologically. But eventually, some days you sit down, you don't get an inspired thought for any of the skeleton, so you do just start working through it chronologically. And eventually you've got to fill the gaps chronologically anyway. But it is a process of using as much inspiration as possible and then allowing the mechanical workings to actually fill all the gaps between all those lovely inspired moments.